It started with a funeral. Not one of those dramatic ones you see in movies with thunder rolling overhead and black veils fluttering in the wind. Just a small, tense gathering under a gray Ohio sky. My dad's third wife, Valerie, had lost her mother, an elderly woman I never really knew. I hadn't been home in nearly a year, but I made the drive down from Chicago, not because I cared about the woman in the casket, but because it was the right thing to do. Family, even the messy kind, still meant something to me. The house felt unfamiliar when I pulled into the driveway, the yard too neat, the windows too clean. I parked beside a black SUV I didn't recognize. When I stepped through the front door, Valerie greeted me with that over-sweet smile she always wore when she was trying not to be judged. But it wasn't her presence that threw me. It was the woman standing behind her in the kitchen. Same eyes as Valerie, but sharper, more observant, as if she could see through the polite masks people wear at times like this. "This is my sister, Danny," Valerie said. "She flew in from Arizona last night." Danny. I had heard the name in passing over the years, a few stories exchanged in bored conversations. Younger than Valerie by 5 years, no husband, no kids, worked in real estate. She gave me a quiet, evaluating smile, then extended her hand. Her grip was firm and warm. "Logan," she said, "Val's told me about you. Only the good things, I hope." She tilted her head, smiled without showing her teeth. "Mostly." There was something in the way she looked at me. No, the way she didn't look away. Like she wanted to know something, but wasn't in a rush to ask. The funeral came and went, awkward hugs and too much ham on paper plates. People left, the house thinned out, and by evening, only Valerie, Danny, and I were left in the kitchen, a half-empty bottle of wine on the counter, and the sound of rain tapping the windows. Valerie headed to bed early, claiming exhaustion, and left us alone, just like that. We didn't talk much at first. I rinsed dishes while Danny dried them, working in quiet rhythm, too aware of how close we stood. She wasn't like Valerie. Less polished, more grounded. Her hair was darker, pulled back into a loose bun that had started to fall apart by evening, and her t-shirt hung off one shoulder, revealing a thin black strap and the smooth curve of her collarbone. Her eyes flicked toward me every so often, like she was reading more than just my words. "You don't look much like your dad," she said eventually, setting a plate on the rack. "I get that a lot. You carry yourself different, like you don't need the room to notice you. But they do anyway." I wasn't sure how to respond to that. No one ever said things like that to me. Not directly. "You always say what you're thinking?" I asked, drying my hands. "Not always," she said, and turned to face me fully, leaning back against the counter, "but sometimes it feels like a waste not to." The kitchen lights were dim, the soft hum of the dishwasher filling the silence between us. She was watching me again, eyes dark and still, like she was waiting for me to move first. "I guess you being here means you and Valerie are close?" I asked, mostly to say something. She shrugged. "We talk. Not as much as we should. You know how family is." I nodded, then leaned back against the opposite counter, arms crossed. She mirrored me, just far enough away to not touch, but close enough that I could feel the space between us like a wire pulled tight. "I thought you'd be gone already," I admitted. "Most people fly out the next day." She smiled, slow and careful. Most people didn't grow up with Val. I figured she might need me a little longer. It wasn't flirtation, not yet, but there was something personal in her voice, something more than casual. And when she stepped forward to pour herself another glass of wine, Her hip brushed mine, just a second too long to be accidental. She didn't move fast. She didn't apologize. "You want one?" she asked, already reaching for a second glass. I nodded and she poured, handed it to me. Her fingers touched mine, not by mistake. We stood there in the kitchen, barely talking, just sipping and glancing and letting the silence stretch out between us until it started to feel full instead of empty. At one point, she laughed at something I said. I don't even remember what it was, but the way her hand rested lightly on my arm as she leaned in, that stayed with me. And then it happened. She looked toward the hallway, then toward the kitchen door, then slowly, deliberately, reached behind her and clicked the lock. It wasn't loud, just a soft snick, barely audible over the hum of the dishwasher. But it felt seismic. My stomach tightened. "What are you doing?" I asked, but my voice came out lower than I meant it to. She set her glass down, turned toward me. "I don't know," she said quietly, and I believed her. I don't usually feel things this fast." I swallowed. She stepped closer. I didn't move. Her hand rose, not rushed, just steady, and she touched the collar of my shirt, not pulling, not pushing, just resting there. "This is a bad idea," I said. "Probably." I could feel her breath now, warm and slow. She smelled like sandalwood and wine. And there, in the middle of my father's kitchen, with his wife asleep down the hall, her sister moved closer and pressed her lips lightly, just lightly, against my jaw. "I should go," I said, not moving. "Do you want to?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. She stepped back just a little, enough to give me the choice. Her eyes held mine, open, unreadable. My pulse was thudding in my throat. I could still walk out, say goodnight, pretend the moment hadn't happened. But the door was still locked, and neither of us had moved. I took her glass, set it down next to mine, and then I leaned in, not fast, not sure, but enough. Her hand slid up my chest as our lips met. Nothing deep, not yet. Just a slow, careful kiss that carried every unspoken word between us. It was like she was asking me a question with every movement, and I kept answering without words. When we finally broke apart, her hand still rested on my chest. She didn't speak, just looked at me, breathing a little faster now, her pupils dark with something that hadn't been there before. "This changes things," I said. "I know." She turned, unlocked the door, and walked out of the kitchen without looking back. I stood there alone, the air still thick with something electric. The glasses were still on the counter, the door was unlocked, and nothing in the house felt the same anymore. The next morning broke slow and quiet, with that strange calm that follows a storm you didn't see coming. The sky dull and white, like a blank sheet, waiting for someone to write what happens next. And I found myself moving through the house differently, aware of every footstep, every creak of the floor, listening for signs of her before I saw her. Danny was already up when I walked into the kitchen, dressed in a faded blue sweater and leggings, barefoot on the tile floor, her hair damp from a shower and pushed back carelessly. The kind of effortless look that made it impossible not to stare a little too long. She glanced at me over her coffee, her expression unreadable but not cold. More like she was waiting to see which version of me would show up. Logan the guest, Logan the stepson, or the man who didn't pull away when she locked the door and touched his mouth like she'd been thinking about it for days. I poured myself a cup, the silence between us thick but not uncomfortable, and when she finally spoke, it wasn't the question I expected. "You sleep okay?" she asked, stirring sugar into her mug with the back of a spoon, not looking up yet, like she wanted to give me a chance to lie if I wanted to. I nodded, then shook my head. both at once, because it didn't feel right to pretend, and didn't feel smart to tell the truth either, and I set my coffee down harder than I meant to. "Not really," I said finally, my voice low, not embarrassed but different, careful, like I knew we were stepping into something we wouldn't be able to step back out of. She looked at me then, eyes steady, her mouth a soft line that curved up just a little at one corner, like she was relieved I didn't fake it. Didn't smile, like none of it mattered. "Me either," she said. And that was all it took to tie us together again. That quiet admission that last night hadn't been nothing, that it had sunk its teeth in somewhere beneath the skin, and stayed there. Valerie didn't come downstairs for another hour, and when she did, she didn't notice the way Danny's hand lingered on the back of my chair as she walked behind me, or the way we exchanged glances like we were passing notes across a classroom no one else could see. The day dragged in that heavy, shapeless way small-town afternoons do, when there's nothing scheduled and nowhere to go, and I kept catching myself looking out the window, watching the wind ruffle the hedges, and thinking about the weight of Danny's gaze last night, the warmth of her mouth on my skin, how she'd stepped back like she was daring me to move next. She avoided me for most of the day. Not out of guilt. I would have sensed that. But because she was waiting for night again. And I knew that as clearly as I knew the way my body had felt when she touched me, like every nerve had been lit and left smoldering in the quiet. It was nearly 9 when I saw her again, curled up on the couch with a glass of red wine, the lights low, her phone face down on the coffee table, and she looked up at me as I walked in and patted the cushion beside her like nothing in the world was wrong. I sat down slowly, not close, but not far enough to be safe, and the silence between us stretched, not empty, but alive, the way charged air feels before lightning snaps through it. "I wasn't sure you'd come in," she said, her voice softer than it had been earlier, more vulnerable, like she was opening a door and waiting to see if I'd walk through it or slam it shut. "I've been thinking about last night," I said, my eyes not on hers but on the wineglass, watching the way her fingers curled around the stem, delicate but strong, like she had no intention of letting go unless I made her. "Me too," she said, and that was it. That was the fuse, and the quiet became something else, something heavier and harder to ignore. I turned to her then, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw past the layers she wore like armor, the sharpness, the jokes, the cool calm, and into the ache she hadn't named yet, the want-to that had been waiting for permission. She didn't reach for me this time. She didn't have to. I moved closer just enough for our knees to touch, and her breath hitched, a tiny sound that made something deep in my chest tighten, like a wire pulled taut between us. "Danny," I said because I had to say something, because her name felt like the only word I trusted at that moment. But she didn't answer, just leaned in slowly, so slowly, and her lips met mine again. Not in a rush, not with hunger, but with an aching, trembling need that was somehow louder than any shout. Her hand came up, cupping the side of my face, her fingers threading through my hair, and when I kissed her back, it wasn't about lust or impulse. It was about all the things we hadn't said, the ways we'd been circling each other since that first glance over coffee and plates in a too-clean kitchen. The kiss deepened, not sharp but slow, like we had time, like we had all the time in the world. And when her fingers slipped under the collar of my shirt, brushing bare skin, I shivered. Not from cold, but from how right it felt and how wrong it should have been. We pulled back just enough to breathe, foreheads touching, eyes open, and the look she gave me then said everything. This wasn't pretend. This wasn't curiosity, or boredom, or convenience. This was real, and it was dangerous. She exhaled against my mouth, her voice barely a whisper. I don't want to stop. My heart stuttered, then surged. Then don't, I said. And in that moment, we both understood what it meant. There would be no turning back, no pretending it didn't happen, and no one in the house could ever know. She kissed me again, deeper this time, with something between urgency and reverence. And when her body leaned into mine, when her hand found my chest and rested there like she was feeling the rhythm of something sacred, I knew we were crossing the line fully now. Not just flirting with the idea, not teasing the edge, but stepping over and letting it take us. The next few days blurred into something half real, like a dream I kept waking from but never fully left, where nothing between us was spoken outright, yet everything we did pulsed with the unspoken weight of what had changed. And I found myself moving through the house like I was navigating a second invisible floor plan, one where every room we passed through carried the ghost of that night, that kiss, that slow, trembling pull into each other. Danny and I didn't talk about it, not with words, but the way her eyes followed me when Valerie left the room, the way my shoulder would brush hers a moment too long in the hallway, the way we both paused before saying good night, like we were holding back something that might crack open and flood the house if we let it. Those moments said more than anything we could have put into sentences. One afternoon, while Valerie was out meeting a friend for lunch, the house fell quiet in a way that felt heavy rather than peaceful. And I found Danny in the sunroom, curled into the corner of the couch with her knees pulled up and a book open in her lap. But her eyes weren't moving across the page. They were still, staring at the same line like she hadn't turned the page in half an hour. I leaned against the doorway, watching her for a moment, caught in something I couldn't name because it wasn't just attraction anymore. It was the way she inhabited silence like it belonged to her, the way she carried a kind of tension beneath her skin, like it was always waiting to be touched. She looked up slowly when she realized I was watching her, the corner of her mouth twitching into the beginning of a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. And in that tiny distance between what she showed and what she held back, I felt the ache rise again, that shared longing neither of us had figured out how to live with yet. "You always stare like that?" she asked, her voice light but tired, like she was testing whether I'd laugh or let the truth hang there. "Only when I don't know what to say," I said, stepping into the room and closing the door behind me, not slamming it, not hiding it, just closing it like I needed the space to feel separate from the rest of the world for a minute. Her gaze didn't leave mine as I crossed the room, and when I sat down next to her, closer than I needed to, not close enough to touch, she didn't move away, just closed her book and set it on the table like she knew this conversation wasn't going to let her return to it anyway. "I thought maybe you'd be gone by now," she said after a moment, her tone unreadable. Not accusatory, but distant, like she was protecting herself before I could say something that might hurt. "I thought about it," I admitted, and the honesty settled between us like dust, soft but visible, and she looked down at her hands in her lap as if they'd betrayed her, somehow, by not being able to stay still. "But you're still here," she said, more to herself than to me. "I don't know what this is," I said quietly, my voice thinner than I meant it to be, and I hated that I sounded uncertain when everything in me was pulled toward her like gravity, like a tide that refused to turn back. She looked up again then, and the way she stared at me, it wasn't romantic, not soft or dreamy, but sharp and raw, like she was finally letting herself be seen without the usual mask. "It's not nothing," she said, and her voice cracked just enough at the end to make my chest tighten. "I know," I said, and this time I reached for her hand, not like I was asking for anything, just like I needed to feel her, to ground myself in something real before I lost whatever this fragile thing between us had become. Her fingers laced with mine slowly, hesitantly, like she was still trying to decide whether she was allowed to want what we both already knew we couldn't pretend to avoid anymore. When she looked at me again, her eyes were glassy, not from tears exactly, but from the tension of holding too much inside, and she whispered, "Tell me I'm not crazy." I leaned in then, my forehead touching hers, and I said, "If you're crazy, then so am I." And we both laughed, low and broken, like people who'd run too far and finally stopped to look around and realized there was no map to where they were standing. She kissed me again. Not rushed, not desperate, but deeply, like she was drinking in something she hadn't let herself believe she needed until now. And I kissed her back the same way, and in that moment, the world outside the walls of the sunroom disappeared. We didn't say anything else as she climbed onto my lap, straddling me with the slow grace of someone who wasn't playing a part, who wasn't performing, but simply surrendering, and her hands cupped my face like I was something she'd been holding back from touching for too long. Every breath between us grew louder, every shift of our bodies pulling us deeper into the gravity of the moment. And when her fingers slid under the hem of my shirt, skimming along my ribs like a question, I let my head fall back against the couch and closed my eyes, because feeling her like this was too much and not enough all at once. Her mouth found the corner of my jaw, then my throat, then just below my ear, and every place she touched became a wound and a balm, and I reached for her waist, grounding us both in the heat of skin meeting skin, the curve of her body against mine like a shape I hadn't realized I knew by heart. We didn't rush. It wasn't about hunger or thrill or crossing lines for the sake of rebellion. It was about the slow unraveling of restraint, the way two people look at each other and know there's no point in pretending anymore, no need for excuses or apologies, because the truth had already seeped into everything. Her breath was in my ear when she whispered my name, soft and breaking, and I held her tighter, both of us moving in a rhythm that wasn't about sex or even desire. It was about recognition, about being seen in a way that stripped you down to your most honest, aching self. When we finally stopped, when our foreheads pressed together again, and our breathing began to slow, I felt her hand slide into the space between our hearts, like she was trying to feel something that words couldn't hold. And then she whispered the only thing that could have made the moment more real. "I don't want to hide anymore." Neither did I. But we both knew what that meant, and neither of us said it out loud. It had been 2 weeks since that day in the sunroom, and everything since had taken on a strange new texture, like the air itself had thickened with everything we weren't saying. Like each time we walked past one another, we were walking the edge of something vast and unseen, something waiting to pull us under. We didn't talk about what we were. We didn't label it, didn't define it, didn't dare to box it in. Because boxes have corners, and this thing between us had no edges. We lived inside glances held too long, hands brushing in narrow doorways, midnight silences charged with the weight of memory, and every moment carried the echo of what had already passed between us. Her mouth on mine, her breath in my ear, the way she'd whispered my name not like it belonged to me, but like it belonged to her. But it couldn't last like that, not forever. And deep down we both knew the tension between us was tightening, stretching thinner each day like a wire pulled too taut, waiting to snap. Not if, but when. The final crack came one late afternoon, ordinary in every way but one. The kind of day that starts like any other and ends with the world turned inside out. Valerie had gone into town to meet her lawyer about the estate, and I was in the garage helping Danny look for an old photo album she claimed she wanted to send to their cousin, though I suspected even then it was an excuse, a reason to be alone in a room where the air didn't belong to anyone else. The garage smelled of dust and old cardboard, and the light from the high window slanted across her face as she bent to open a storage bin, her hair slipping over her shoulder, her shirt riding up slightly to reveal the small of her back. I turned away. I had to. I'd told myself 100 times since that night that what happened between us had been a release, a mistake we wouldn't repeat, that it meant something. Yes, but that it wasn't supposed to happen again. And then she looked up at me, one arm resting on the edge of the box, her eyes catching mine and holding them. And I knew that she wasn't thinking about the photo album at all. "You're quiet," she said. "I've been trying not to be," I replied, my voice rougher than I meant, too honest. She stood dusting off her hands and took a step toward me. "What happens if I kiss you right now?" she asked so simply, so devastatingly, that I felt the floor tilt beneath me. I stared at her. Her eyes were wide, open, terrified, hopeful. I said nothing. She reached up and placed her hand on my chest, right over the place my heart had started to pound, slow and hard and deep. "I don't want this to be half real anymore," she whispered. "I want it to be something we don't lie to ourselves about." "Danny," I breathed, but my protest was hollow, my name on her lips already burning into me like a brand. Her other hand lifted, and her fingers touched the side of my face, tracing along my jaw, so softly it almost hurt. And then she kissed me. This time, it wasn't careful. It wasn't hesitant. It wasn't a question. It was the kind of kiss that burned down everything we'd tried to build between us for protection. The walls, the silence, the carefully navigated routines, and in its place it left nothing but truth. Her body pressed to mine, full and warm and unguarded, and I wrapped my arms around her like I'd been holding my breath for weeks, and only now remembered how to inhale again. The garage was dim and quiet, but inside me it felt like everything was on fire, and when she pulled back to look at me, eyes bright and lips parted, I knew there was no going back. This was the moment. The line was crossed. There was no pretending after this, no rewriting it, no erasing the taste of her mouth, or the way she'd melted into me like she belonged there. And the worst part, the best part, was that neither of us wanted to. We left the garage wordless, hands brushing but not holding, our breath still uneven, her head slightly bowed. And I watched the way she walked, slow, steady, the weight of what we'd just done settling into her steps. That night, after Valerie returned and the house slipped into its usual hush, I found Danny waiting for me on the back porch, wrapped in a blanket barefoot, her eyes reflecting the porch light and something else, something raw and impossible to name. She didn't speak. She just opened the blanket, and I stepped into it, into her, into us, and I held her, and we said nothing, because everything that mattered had already been said with a kiss, and nothing would ever be the same again,